Good morning. The name of our lesson today is Accepting Discipline, and we're in Proverbs chapter 29 today. God uses discipline from society, family, and others to shape His people. When you mention the word discipline, you get all kinds of reactions. Many see discipline as drudgery and punishment, but few things happen in life that are meaningful that do not involve discipline. The athlete, the scientist, the theologian, and the businessman must be disciplined and focused if they are to succeed. In the same way, believers should welcome discipline for the purpose of holiness. This part of Proverbs can be divided into two sections. The first section, chapter 24, verses 23 through 24, considers two issues: going to court and going to work. A wise judge makes sure favoritism does not enter the courtroom. A witness demonstrates wisdom by refusing to commit perjury or to use the court as an opportunity to get revenge. When it comes to working, only a foolish person would buy items for personal comfort before purchasing what is necessary to establish a home. Also, foolish people ignore the need to take care of their property, and that's why they run the risk of living in poverty. The second section consists of Solomon's Proverbs that had been copied by some of Hezekiah's men. Hezekiah became king of Judah over 200 years after Solomon's reign came to an end. He earned the reputation of being a king who honored the Lord. When he came to the throne, he repaired the temple in Jerusalem, and he took away the pagan idols. Under his reign, God's people began to celebrate Passover again, as well as the other festivals associated with worshiping Him. Hezekiah's collection of Solomon's Proverbs gives insight from God's wisdom that enable His people to make right decisions. The collection also includes a series of proverbs that shed light on how to deal with difficult people, how to identify and maintain authentic friendships, and the value of discipline. It includes some of the concerns a father has for his children. Furthermore, this section of Proverbs provides instructions on going to court and establishing a home. The theme of the entire section is summarized in two appeals. One appeal is to trust God above everything else in life. The other appeal involves choosing the path of righteousness and avoiding the path of evil. Proverbs 29:1 says, "One who becomes stiff-necked after many reprimands will be shattered instantly, beyond recovery." Being disciplined doesn't imply being punished. God doesn't intend for discipline to be a form of punishment. He wants to render within us a humble willingness to submit ourselves to Him. The problem with discipline comes when we decide to be stiff-necked. A stubborn mule will stiffen its neck to resist the bridle. A stubborn person can refuse to take God's reprimands as opportunities to be submissive. God works patiently and lovingly with people so they will yield to Him. Stubborn people who have rejected His wisdom demonstrate rebellion against Him by constantly ignoring His correction. The future for such rebellious individuals promises to be devastating. A series of rebellious responses to the Lord's wisdom brings certain and sudden destruction. As people continue to harden their minds and hearts against God, He allows them to face shattering consequences because of their stubbornness. They are beyond recovery because they have gone too far. Nothing else will be done to help them. Verses 2 through 3 say, "When the righteous flourish, the people rejoice, but when the wicked rule, people groan. A man who loves wisdom brings joy to his father, but one who consorts with prostitutes destroys his wealth." There's a stark contrast to the dismal outcome for a person who rejects God's discipline and the optimistic future for God's people who have been made righteous because they place their trust in Him. The righteous will flourish. A person who genuinely loves the Lord shows it in the way he or she treats others. When a wicked person takes over a community or a kingdom, the outcome is not the same. Instead of rejoicing, the people who live in their shadow find themselves groaning over their predicament. They are very troubled by what is going to happen to them next. power and authority in the hands of someone who has rejected the Lord can produce misery for people who live under their influence. Verse 3 shows the difference the Lord's discipline makes in a believer's life. The resolve to live in a way that pleases the Lord emanates from a genuine love for His wisdom. Becoming more disciplined involves giving more attention to seeking His wisdom and following its path. A person who takes such a wise path brings joy to his or her parents. Anyone who rejects the Lord's discipline can expect to have a heartbreaking fate. Self-indulgence will put them on the path of satisfying their own lusts. Lust takes a wide range of forms, but its outcome always takes the shape of destruction. Verses 12 through 13 say, "If a ruler listens to lies, all his officials will be wicked. The poor and the oppressor have this in common. The Lord gives light to the eyes of both." A ruler in the days of Solomon had the power to influence the lives of everyone under his reign. Citizens who lived in his kingdom didn't have a voice in their own government. They had no choice but to submit to their ruler's sovereign authority. Since complete control rested on the ruler, the integrity of the ruler made the difference in whether the people would be mistreated or treated well. The level of his integrity would be influenced by the advice he received. If he listened to godly counsel from people who walked in God's wisdom, he would be encouraged to make decisions marked by a commitment to the upright. But if he brought corrupt leaders and advisors into his administration who told him lies, he would be prone to making bad choices. They would lie to him if they thought it would help him, or they would lie to him in order to help themselves. Listening to their lies would have a very contaminating effect. The king would not rule with integrity. Instead, his reign would be cursed with corruption. His officials who followed his leadership would be wicked as well. The influence of a king's advisors serves as a fitting backdrop for the wisdom offered in verse 13. The poor represent people who have no power. When a person who has no integrity gains power, that person can become an oppressor of the poor who cannot defend themselves. On the surface, the poor and the oppressor appear to have nothing in common, but in another way, they're very much alike. Poor people and their oppressors have the same potential to turn to the Lord and to trust Him enough to seek His wisdom. The light of His wisdom can drive out spiritual darkness so they can see the right path. The Lord will give them insight so their eyes can be opened to His direction for them. Verse 14 says, "A king who judges the poor with fairness, his throne will be established forever." For a king who valued integrity, making righteous judgments would be a priority. A corrupt ruler would render judgments and issue decrees that favored only his political allies or strengthened his power base in some way. He would never think twice about abusing the poor. A righteous ruler lived with the conviction that poor people needed to be treated with fairness. Instead of making them invisible, he would see them as citizens who deserved respect. Therefore, his judgments involving them would be guided by truth instead of by power. Because he gave attention to fairness, he could expect his kingdom to thrive. He would gain the respect of the citizens of his kingdom, and they would appreciate his authority. If he rendered fair judgment to powerless people, his kingdom would last forever. When leaders give themselves to the Lord, they can count on Him to make them wise to lead with integrity. As a result, the people who follow them will enjoy the blessing of stability. Verses 15 through 17 say, "A rod of correction imparts wisdom, but a youth left to himself is a disgrace to his mother. When the wicked increase, rebellion increases, but the righteous will see their downfall. Discipline your child, and it will bring you peace of mind and give you delight." When we think about the rod of correction, we need clarity about the difference between discipline and abuse. Parents who have the best interest of their child at heart will never hesitate to discipline when necessary, because they want that child to grow in wisdom, and discipline helps their child to become a wise adult. On the other hand, Abusive parents don't have a worthwhile reason for inflicting pain on a defenseless child. They may fall under the powerful control of dark, destructive urges that give them permission to be abusive. With their awful behavior, they leave physical and emotional scars on a child that can last a lifetime. Some parents allow their children to grow up without any discipline at all. Undisciplined children grow up aimlessly. They will spend the days of their youth in pursuit of foolishness that eventually will bring disgrace to their mother. The focus of discipline in verse 16 shifts from a house to the community. A parent's work of disciplining a child can be frustrated by the spread of wickedness around them. Wicked people can take the form of bullies who lurk in the shadows and strike innocent individuals when they get the chance. Or they can take the shape of community leaders, business leaders, or government leaders whose evil has been fortified by their power. Their rebellion against godly wisdom puts the spotlight on them, and the glare of their moral decay grows brighter every day. A reliable promise helps to settle the frustration of parents who raise their children in a wicked environment. It offers the kind of assurance that will encourage parents to keep on working to discipline their children. The day will come when godly parents see the downfall of rebellious individuals who have chosen to live under the control of evil influences. Wicked kingdoms will collapse. Their downfall may occur here and now, or it may happen later. But either way, the Lord will have the last word over rebellion. That's when righteous people will be pleased that they taught their children to live as disciplined individuals in an undisciplined world. With the promise comes a challenge to parents in verse 17. God's wisdom at work in a family guides parents to take seriously the mandate to discipline children. Discipline involves instruction and instructing children to fear the Lord, to seek His wisdom and to follow it. It requires parents to spend quality time with their children. It also requires them to invest their resources in what's best for their children and to live before them as good examples of adults who love the Lord and follow His wisdom. Giving attention to the discipline of their children results in long-term blessings for parents. They will be blessed with peace of mind. They will be able to rest in the confidence that their children will handle the challenges ahead of them with wisdom. They will experience the delight that goes along with watching their children grow up to be wise adults. The possibility of these blessings makes the investment in children more than worthwhile for the parents. Verse 18 says, "Without revelation, people run wild, but one who follows divine instruction will be happy." Without discipline, people run wild. By the same token, God's people who have no spiritual insight can become just as unrestrained. When we think about the need for revelation, our thoughts turn to the vital necessity of hearing from the Lord. Listening to God focuses our thoughts on Him. It helps us direct our energy according to His purposes. In the Old Testament days, God's people heard from Him most often through the preaching of the prophets. Their preachings opened the spiritual eyes of His people so they could see what He wanted them to do. God's people grow more disciplined as they give their full attention to His instructions. They demonstrate that they take it seriously by obeying what He has taught in His Word. Spiritual insight from the Lord and instruction in His Word nourish a happy heart for believers. We are inspired by what God is doing in our lives, and we look forward to serving Him as our highest priority. Verse 19 says, "A servant cannot be disciplined by words. Though he understands, he doesn't respond." The relationship of a master to his servant helped people in Solomon's day grasp the challenge of trying to change another person's directions. In those days, masters used words to command their servants. The words only made a difference if the servant listened with obedience. A servant may have been able to understand what the master said, but hearing those words didn't guarantee that the servant's behavior would change. In fact, a servant could hear the words and never respond. When the master saw that the servant was ignoring his words, he had to do something about it. He would need to compel his servant to have a change of heart. Otherwise, the servant would have never taken the master's command seriously. This proverb about the servant brings up the problem of stubbornness. Followers of Christ can hear what he's saying to us, but we may not be willing to conform our lives in keeping with it. However, as wise Christians, we are disciplined to take God's direction seriously. Being disciplined involves nurturing a humble and willing heart. Such a change of heart enables us to listen to him carefully and to obey him consistently. Verse 20 says, "Do you see someone who speaks too soon? There is more hope for a fool than for him." God's Word gives us what we need to be wise in him and to apply his wisdom in our lives. The Proverbs in this verse points to an obstacle that prevents us from receiving his Word. We can't listen to God when we're unable to be quiet. A person who speaks too soon is someone who's too hasty when it comes to talking. When we speak before we're listened, then we're in too big of a hurry. We're in a rush to fill up the air with our speech. In a conversation, for example, we're only interested in waiting for our turn to talk, and we get impatient when our turn doesn't come soon enough. When we think about hearing from God, we're foolish if we don't learn the discipline of being quiet and listening to him. This proverb warns us that we're worse than fools. Foolish people listen, but to the wrong voices. Yet they have the potential for listening to God and turning to him. A person who can't be quiet doesn't have that possibility. Hope is squandered by an unwillingness to be quiet long enough to listen to God. We have to stop, take the time to listen, and obey the words that God is telling us to do.